this cover-up. The State Department offered the individuals who did the shooting that day from Blackwater in the Square something called limited use immunity, which is very rarely handed out before you figure out who the guilty parties are. And basically what it said was, you talk to us and nothing you say can or will be used against you in a court of law. That was one of the ways Oliver North got off after Iran-Contra, was because he had been given this immunity, and then later his lawyers argued that prosecutors used that information he provided with his immunity to bring charges against him, and that's how he got off the hook. So the State Department, within hours of this shooting, offers the shooters that limited use immunity. And what that means now is that the FBI, as it investigates it, cannot use any of that information that these individuals gave to bring any charges against them. Now, if you have any faith in the Bush Justice Department's ability or willingness to prosecute politically connected corporations, you probably weren't invited here, and I look forward to your disruption in a few moments. But what we saw was that you have a crime scene where you have 17 civilians that were gunned down, apparently in cold blood, with no provocation whatsoever. The chief law enforcement entity of the United States government is the FBI. They were not sent in to investigate for a full 2 weeks. While that crime scene was contaminated, while witnesses were not taken in for questioning, while the individuals had been granted some form of an immunity. And in fact, when the FBI finally got around to being sent over there, it emerged that Blackwater was actually going to be guarding the investigators for the FBI, until Senator Patrick Leahy stood up and said, "This is insane. The accused killers and their friends are going to be guarding the investigators?" You see, that this is the reality. You know who guards Nancy Pelosi when she goes over to Iraq? Blackwater. How on earth are we going to have an aggressive congressional investigation against these guys when congresspeople go over there and depend on them to stay alive? That's how deep this has cut. But something interesting happened. The Iraqi government did an investigation that was maligned left and right in the press. The corrupt, and I concur with what Luis was saying, the corrupt Iraqi Interior Ministry. And I think there's a lot of reason to be suspicious of what the Iraqi Interior Ministry says. But in this case, what the Iraqis accused Blackwater of doing was corroborated not by the State Department, who employs Blackwater and depends on its mercenaries to keep its forces alive, not by the Bush White House, but by the U.S. military. The Army sent investigators there almost immediately. In fact, they were there within 12 minutes of the first death that happened in the square that day. They investigated it. And what the U.S. military determined, and this got almost no publicity whatsoever except for one story in the Washington Post, is that all 17 of those Iraqis were killed as a result of unjustified and unprovoked fire, and they said that it was criminal conduct. That was the military investigation. When the FBI, and what the military did, what the Bush White House and its State Department should have done immediately, they interviewed Iraqi witnesses. They interviewed Iraqi police officers on the scene. They interviewed people who themselves had been shot. They interviewed some of the individuals who had taken part in the melee that day. We also discovered that apparently one Blackwater officer was so horrified, Blackwater mercenary was so horrified at what was happening, that he turned his own weapon on another Blackwater guy and told him to cease fire. That's how out of control it had gotten. So the military does its investigation. The FBI finally gets over there, and I was very skeptical of what the FBI was going to find. But what was incredible is that the FBI leaked some of its findings to the New York Times, and we understand that the FBI says that 14 of those 17 deaths were as a result of unjustified and unprovoked fire. The military in return said that the FBI was being too generous to Blackwater. And so what happens now? Where are the individuals who gunned down these 17 people? They're walking around as free people. They'll never be handed over to the Iraqi legal system, and they may never be prosecuted in this country, because the laws on the books right now in the United States are such that if you're a soldier and you murder someone in Iraq, you could be court-martialed, clear as could be. There have been at least 64 murder-related courts-martial in Iraq. I think the number is probably much greater now, which I think is shockingly low. I think that there's been a lot more murder in Iraq by U.S. soldiers, and it needs to be prosecuted. Not a single armed contractor has ever been prosecuted for any crimes in Iraq whatsoever. Not jaywalking, not murder, not torture. Only 2 contractors of the hundreds of thousands that have gone in and out of there over the course of 5 years have ever been charged with any crime. One of them was an individual who pled guilty to possession of child pornography images on his computer at Abu Ghraib prison. How about the contractors who have participated in the torture at Abu Ghraib prison? This guy goes down for having porno images on his computer, a moral crime in the eyes of the Bush administration. And then you have another prosecution of an individual who allegedly stabbed a coworker in a kitchen, a KBR person. That represents the entirety of prosecution of the private army that the Bush administration has deployed in Iraq. Blackwater is not the biggest of these companies. It's not even the most profitable. It's sort of like a high-end boutique on a strip full of Walmarts. It's the Maserati of the industry. But right now in Iraq, as Luis said, you have somewhere between 150 and 160,000 U.S. soldiers who wear the United States flag. You have 182,000 private contractors, and that doesn't even count the armed ones. They work for 630 corporations on the U.S. government payroll. They draw personnel from 100 countries around the world. In addition to that, you have 170 mercenary firms operating in Iraq. I want to repeat that. There are 170 companies that provide services like Blackwater's in Iraq right now. That's almost as many nations as there are registered at the UN. What does that say about the discussion that we, all of us, I think, have about Iraq being a model? You know, the role of the U.S. military in Iraq, one of the main roles that the U.S. military has played in Iraq has been to ensure that U.S. war corporations make a killing off of that war. And KBR provides poison water to the troops. They don't even take care of the people that they're using to make their killing in Iraq. And you know, Blackwater has taken in $1 billion in security contracts just in Iraq. That doesn't count their work in Afghanistan or the 50,000 U.S. personnel they train a year at their private military base in Moyac, North Carolina. This has not just been about looting Iraq or taking Iraq's oil. It's also about looting the U.S. Treasury. It's about undermining U.S. democratic processes. Why has the Bush administration elected to use this army of private contractors? Others on this panel have alluded to it, but I think it boils down to a couple of very basic reasons. This administration does not